All right. Hi, Cindy. I'm very pleased to have the chance to interview you about the museum and your role in it. So, this is the year 2022, and it's a special occasion. It's the 10th anniversary of MoMath. Um, could we start by having you tell us a little about the mission of the museum?
Absolutely. And to say it briefly, the mission is to make math accessible and engaging for everybody.
Well, it certainly does do that. What are some of the things that the museum offers?
Well, first of all, we have a visitor center, which you can see behind both of us right now. And we have exhibits that don't really look like math the way people expect to see math when they decide to come visit a museum of mathematics. People are expecting to see numbers and calculators and maybe rulers or graph paper and pens and pencils. And instead, they walk in and they see a giant adult-sized tricycle with square wheels, or they see a magnetic wall with monkeys that can fill space, or they see the floor behind us that changes color as you walk on it in different ways. And the idea is to really make the museum and mathematics, by extension, a very welcoming place where everyone can come in and feel comfortable and feel at home and feel like there's something for them to explore, to discover, and to enjoy. And so that's the physical location. Of course, we also do many programs online and in the museum, and we reach out to people around the world. We're in more than 100 countries now, and we run programs on anything and everything that touches on math, either closely or even loosely. We've had programs on math and music, math and art, math and dance. We've even had a program on the math of bird flight. So we try to reach people no matter what their interests may be. We think there's a way to connect that with mathematics.
You mentioned all the different programs. Are you targeting a specific age group?
So we actually target an age group, we like to say, from age 2 to age 102. And I think we do a pretty good job of reaching all of those different ages. We start with preschool programs, and we have programs for the littlest children, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 2-year-olds. We have programs then for kindergarten through third graders, a very wild story hour that brings math into a fun and engaging story every week. Programs for school-age kids from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. We've got adult-only programs that run twice a week, our senior sessions. And then we have many programs where we hope that audience members of all ages will join together. And two that I'd like to call your attention to: Family Fridays brings family members of all ages together to do something fun and exploratory with mathematics, where we specifically try to come up with activities that the adults will enjoy as much as the children will, and that the children's will understand as much as the adults will. And that's always a good time once a month. That's sponsored by 2 Sigma. And then we have our flagship public presentation series called Math Encounters. That's sponsored by the Simons Foundation. And there we bring a mathematician, someone who has a PhD in mathematics, to share something about what they do, what their area of math study is, in a way that a general audience can understand it. And that's always really exciting, because many mathematicians study areas that are not things that the rest of us would be familiar with. And it's delightful when they can share something about their love of math and what they enjoy so much about what they do with an audience of people that normally would never get to see that world.
It is. It's a remarkable program, bringing the world caliber mathematicians in to talk to the general public. I've certainly enjoyed learning from them and listening to them. I've actually had a chance to do one myself. So while we're on that theme of what some people refer to as STEM education, STEM, I can't say I love the acronym myself: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Some people add an A to that for the arts and call it STEAM. In any case, there's a widespread feeling that STEM is important for careers, for competitiveness of the United States relative to other countries. What role do you see for MoMath in regard to STEM education?
So I think MoMath is really important in the area of what we call informal education. So we don't try to teach students how to get an A on the next standardized test they're going to take in school, but instead we're much more about changing attitudes. And I like to compare math to music when I talk about this topic in this way. If you take, let's say, your young child to hear a symphony orchestra, And they really enjoy that experience. And they come home and they tell you, I would like to play the violin. And this is not just hypothetical. I can tell you this from experience. Many parents will then go out and rent the violin and provide lessons, or the school will provide lessons for their child. And I can tell you pretty much no child that picks up the violin sounds good in the beginning. And also, it's not an easy instrument to play in that there's a lot you have to learn about the mechanics. So somebody has to show you how to hold the violin, where it goes on your shoulder, where your chin goes, how to hold your arm, how to hold the bow, how to make the bow touch the strings, what your other hand should be doing with the strings. So there's all these mechanics that you have to learn. And then there's notation. You have to learn how to read music. And no matter how musical you are, because musical notation is really just a convention, nobody is born knowing what it means when you see lines on a piece of paper and circles in various positions on those lines. So somebody has to teach you that, and you actually have to memorize that if you want to be able to become a musician and play music. And then you have to practice your scales. And that's not always exciting. You play up and down and up and down. And at first it doesn't sound so good, but you get better at it. And ultimately, why does a child go through all of that practice and learning and repetitiveness and mechanics? Because they heard the symphony. And they know if they do all of that, one day they're going to be able to make that beautiful music they heard. And I like to say that MoMath is the symphony of mathematics, because there's a lot of mechanics that kids have to learn. There's a lot of memorization. They're not practicing their scales, but they're practicing their addition facts when they're very little. And then their multiplication tables, and they're memorizing formulas. What would motivate a child to want to do all of that? There has to be something beautiful at the end of that, something they saw that engaged them and inspired them and made them want to understand more. And so I like to say that our role in STEM education is to be that symphony, to be that motivating factor that inspire children and students to want to learn more.
I like it. It's a terrific analogy. And actually, you mentioned about students. It's true for students of all ages, right? The lifelong learners. Also, a lot of people, as you suggest, sort of, if they don't have this symphony experience or the beauty of math, may have been turned off in school or didn't see the point of it. But MoMath gives them a second chance at math at any age, right? I mean, they can all appreciate the symphony.
We very often will have parents that come in with their children because they think it's the right thing to do. They want to give their child an educational experience. And in particular, oftentimes parents will bring their children in because they themselves do not have a comfortable relationship with mathematics. And they don't want to pass that along to their children. They want their children to be more comfortable and more mathematically literate. And very often those parents on the way out will say, boy, I wish a place like this had existed when I was a kid, because I'm sure I would have had a different experience and a different view about math if it had. And I love hearing that. And the other thing that's a little bit related is that when families come to the museum together, very often they're coming because maybe one child in the family really loves math. And then there's a sibling that's getting dragged along and math museum. And what very often happens, and parents tell us this over and over again, is that it's the child that didn't want to come that's the one that they're dragging out, that doesn't want to leave. And we see that not just with kids and families, but with couples. So a couple will come, and maybe it's because the one person in the couple loves math, and the partner came along to do something for their partner that they knew the partner would like. But it's the person who doesn't like math that very often has the more moving experience, the more engaging experience. The person who likes math will come in and find many things they like, and that won't surprise them. But the person who thought they were just coming along for the ride and just, killing time to do something nice for their partner, that's the one who comes away with the more life-changing experience.
That's very interesting. And I can see it. I mean, now that you explain it psychologically, it does, it makes sense. There's a lot more upside for those people. But so we've been talking about the beauty of math, or you mentioned the symphony analogy. For some people, part of the excitement of math is that it gets applied in the real world. That's also something that can be missed in a traditional education. There are always kids who want to say, when am I ever going to use this? When will I use this algebra? Or when am I going to use geometry? Does MoMath address that kind of question?
So we do address that question both indirectly and directly. So indirectly, when you learn how to solve a math problem, you are also learning about problem solving in general. And sometimes it's hard. And if you stick with it and you solve a problem, there's a really sort of a rush that you get when you see the answer or figure something out. And that's a great thing for kids to take away and apply to other areas of their life, because not everything is going to come easily all the time. And so there's something about learning how to think logically and solve problems that I think serves people well. But of course, being mathematically literate has really very practical uses as well. So for example, when you're reading the newspaper and you're reading about statistics, even in today's world where we're all living through a pandemic, and you read about certain rates of infection and you wonder what that means, or you go and buy a take-home test and you want to know if it's 90% effective and I test positive or I test negative, what does that mean? So being able to interpret things and understand things mathematically is important. And then there's all kinds of areas of math that maybe people don't think about as math, but are very important as well. So for example, being efficient is in some sense a math problem. So every one of us, if we have errands to run on the weekend in various places around town, you sort of think to yourself, okay, should I go here first or there first? What is the optimal route for me to use the least amount of gas, or to, be on the right side of the road for the different places I need to go? And so there's a lot of things that we do in life that are based on math, even though we don't necessarily think about that as math. And then certainly in terms of applications, the world around us runs on math, everything from our cell phones to garbage pickup to airplane travel. Anything that runs as a system probably has math and optimization sort of under the hood. So there's a lot of different ways that math is used every day. Even if it's not the problem that you saw in school, you're not going to see a ladder sliding down a wall for calculus. But if you don't understand calculus intrinsically, you don't know when to brake when the car in front of you is slowing down. You have to understand about acceleration and deceleration and how that relates to your position in time. So there's a lot of underlying ways that math is really important for us.
That last example is interesting to me, especially because we have such a charming exhibit that, I have played with myself in the museum that teaches position, velocity, and acceleration through a bodily experience. You actually, maybe you should just, I don't know, it's a little off the topic, but you want to just tell us a little about that exhibit to give people a feeling of what some of the exhibits are like in the museum?
So I like to describe that exhibit as putting you into a video game. And literally, you are standing on a track, and the track is numbered. So there's a unit in front of you that's a 1, a 2 is ahead, and a 3 is further ahead. And behind you, you can actually go into negative positions, -1, -2, -3. And as you move backward and forward on this straight track, we actually have a camera system that's marking where you are. So if you take a giant step forward, you're now at 1. And if you take 2 steps forward, you're now at 2, and so forth and so on. But on top of that, we're also tracking your velocity, which some of us will think of as speed. So if you're standing still, that velocity is 0. And if you move very quickly, your velocity is a little higher. And if you move slowly, your velocity is a little bit lower. And then we can also take that a step further and look at how quickly is your velocity changing. And that's what we call acceleration. And so you're moving back and forth on the straight track. And there are these 3 graphs that show your position, your velocity, and your acceleration, which you can see, and so can everyone around you. But then we turn it into a game. And what happens is you're looking at a screen where these little flags come across the screen at some position or another. They may be at 3 or 2 or 1 or -1 or -2 or -3. And there's a little icon that represents your body, and you have to run back and forth and try and keep your body between those flags. So it becomes a fun challenge physically and something you're enjoying doing, and people are enjoying watching you do. But at the same time, you can watch and see how your position, your velocity, and your acceleration are changing as you move.
It's a very clever exhibit, I have to say, and very effective, I think, as a teacher. I'm aware of pedagogical issues and think about them. And the biofeedback that you get as you move your body faster or slower or accelerate reinforces the understanding of these ideas so much more strongly than you would get just doing it, pencil on paper. Plus, there's the visual of seeing yourself going through the gates. So kudos to the designer. It's sort of typical of the clever ways that you teach things, very sensitive to how people actually learn. But so speaking of learning, you mentioned the pandemic a few minutes ago, which of course has affected the whole world. And one aspect of the pandemic is that a lot of teachers and students have felt a kind of loss of engagement because of, the nature of remote learning. What is MoMath doing to help keep students and maybe help teachers with this engagement issue during the time of COVID?
So we did not really run online programs prior to the pandemic. So that has been a sea change for us. And we immediately changed to online programming. In fact, when I say immediately, I will tell you that our very last in-person field trip was on March 12th, 2020, before we shut down for over a year. Our first online field trip was the same day, March 12th, 2020. We had been preparing for about a month and a half for what at first seemed like sort of a crazy thing to even think about and talk about. Back in early February, nobody was talking about the virus or shutting down New York City, except we were. And so we were actually ready, and we were offering online field trips even before the city shut down in anticipation, hoping it wouldn't happen. And truthfully thinking that we were going to shut down for maybe a few weeks or maybe a month, not thinking we would be shut down for a year. But we launched right into that, and there was a steep learning curve, but we did learn a lot of things about how to engage people. So one thing is, thank goodness, our board was very supportive of the idea that we should provide at very low cost or no cost for families in need all of this engaging programming. So for people whose kids were not in school or in school but not enjoying the remote or not doing well with the remote, we were able to captivate some of those students' attention in ways that parents wrote to us and thanked us about. So they weren't necessarily doing well with school Zoom, but they were being engaged and learning math with MoMath. And one of the things we learned was really important was still trying to have that human connectivity, which a lot of people don't think about as being important with math. We get this idea in school that math is a very solitary endeavor. It's something that you go up into a room by yourself and you lock the door and you take out pencil and paper and you emerge with some new math. And that's not really the way math works. Math is actually very collaborative. Sure, you do think on your own, but you build on the work of others and others will build on your work, and talking with others gives you ideas, gives them ideas. And so we tried to really incorporate that into our online sessions. So we tried to make the audience feel involved. We tried to think about the things that were important for an audience in person and bring that to the Zoom room. So as an example of that, what happens when you go to a great lecture and it's over? You turn, you talk to the people next to you, you maybe go up and talk to the speaker and ask a question you didn't want to ask out loud. But there's this sort of moment where the lecture's over, but the social aspect isn't over. And in a lot of Zoom programs you attend, when the program ends, you suddenly immediately have this abrupt session note on your screen that says the session is over. And you kind of feel a little bit let down and it's abrupt. And so we don't do that. We have a closing screen and we let people continue to chat, and we ask people to unmute and audibly share their thoughts and their comments with the presenter. And it's really a lovely moment of people communicating with each other, even in a world where that has to be remote.
Well, so let's continue on this theme of sort of issues that are affecting our lives nowadays, contemporary issues. Along with the pandemic, there's a lot of interest in trying to enhance diversity and inclusion, make more equitable educational spaces. What steps is MoMath taking in that direction?
So I think one of the best lines I've ever heard is, you can't be it if you can't see it. And mathematics as a field has a problem in that historically we see a lot of white men as mathematicians. And that is sort of a self-perpetuating cycle, because when young girls or young people of color see mathematicians that don't look like them and they can't identify with them, they get the feeling, even if it's subconscious, that math is not a place for them, not a place for a woman, not a place for a Black person or a person of color. And so we're really striving right now to demonstrate and to bring to the table diverse mathematicians so that every student, every person can see someone who looks like them, who they can identify with, who does mathematics, who's recognized for doing mathematics. We had a wonderful program called Bending the Arc, where we brought together a group of Black mathematicians and engineers to talk about their experiences very candidly, to talk about the challenges of going into mathematics as a Black person and how they accomplished what they did. And we did the same thing. Actually, we did a series of 3 similar sessions focusing on women in mathematics. So 3 times, we brought 5 women each time. And again, part of it was the people had a moment on the panel to speak and share their thoughts. But a big part of the program was then putting students and participants in breakout rooms individually with each of these people. And we rotated them around. So if you were a participant in either of these programs, Bend New York with the Black mathematicians, or The Limit Does Not Exist, which is what we call the program focusing on women in mathematics, you rotated around. You had a chance to personally speak with each of the 5 panelists, to ask any question you wanted, to hear from them, to feel like you were having an intimate conversation with them. And so it really felt very intimate. A lot of people felt that was very meaningful. We are also sort of making lemonade out of lemons. So the lemons for us and for all museums is that during a pandemic, schools do not come on field trips to museums right now. And that's usually a huge part of our revenue model, a huge part of our operation. And so we have educators and we have a museum and we have no schools coming in. But the lemonade that we're making out of that is that we have identified schools around New York City that have significant populations of underrepresented groups in mathematics. And we are sending our educators and our exhibits out to those schools where we can bring math and the engagement and joy of math, as MoMath demonstrates it, directly to those populations. Again, we're hoping that young people will see something that they can relate to, something that inspires them, and hopefully we'll see that the world of math is indeed a place where they belong.
That's great. Well, so if you'll allow me to get personal with you just for a minute here. So as a woman in math yourself and a leader of STEM and also of a, very significant cultural institution in New York City and in the nation and the world, why do you feel so passionately about dissemination of math to the wider public?
So in one sense, I'm going to set gender aside for a moment and just say, anytime you do something that's great, you have a great experience, isn't it human to want to share that with other people? To say, wow, I just had this great experience. I'd love for you to have that experience too. And I think in the world of mathematics, most people talk about math in those terms. Wow, I had a great experience. I loved what I just saw in my math classroom. It's just not that common. And I'm not a mathematician, which I think is a key part of my role. So when I first got involved with this, it was as a person who has always loved math and has taken a lot of math classes in my life, but didn't end up having a career in it or majoring in it. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But the things that I started to see with the people who were involved with building this museum, I was constantly coming home and telling my family, oh my God, you can't believe what I saw today or what I learned today. And I want to share that with everyone, not just with the people around me, but with the world, because math is something beautiful. And we can talk about how practical it is. And, you need to know when to hit the brakes in your car. But there's another side of math, which is aesthetic, very much aesthetic. And when you go to an art museum and you see beautiful pieces of art, you can be inspired by that, even though you don't ever think you're going to go home and imitate that. And you don't think there's a practical use for it, but there's something beautiful. And it's a shared human enjoyment of appreciating something beautiful. And that's the side of math that I love and that I think a lot of people do not see. In terms of being a woman in math, I will say that I started out in college as a math major. And the story I will tell you is one that I have heard repeated over and over and over again by many women. And that is, I didn't see what I could do with it. And when I asked questions about that, nobody had any really good answers for me other than you could be a math teacher or maybe you could be an actuary. But I didn't understand that I could major in math and do other things. And I didn't want to be a teacher and I didn't want to be an actuary. And so I kind of went off in another direction. And I think there weren't really women role models to tell me that was okay. And I should still, stick with it if I wanted to. I think also I've heard the story many times from both men and women, but in particular from women, that they can be intimidated when they see that somebody else in a classroom gets it faster, does it more easily. And you can start to feel like math isn't a place for you. And many of the most accomplished mathematicians I know, male and female, will say they weren't the best and brightest students in the room, but they stuck with it and they were successful at it in the end. And I think that's a message that needs to get out, but especially for women, because I think I've heard the story also from many female mathematicians that the way women mathematicians communicate and the way male mathematicians communicate, and I don't want to be too stereotypical here, but I've heard the story enough times that I believe there's something to it. The way they communicate is a little bit different. And women may tend to be, in some cases, a little bit more hesitant or a little bit more, like maybe use the word polite. And men seem to be a little bit more like, they'll call each other out. Like, that's not right. What are you talking about? That's totally wrong. And you hear mathematicians talk to each other in this way that could sound rude if you don't realize that this is just kind of the way they talk to each other. And a woman who is more deferential can tend to fall to the side or not be taken seriously by the people who are being more aggressive in the room. And again, I'm sure there are men who are less aggressive, and certainly there are women who are more aggressive. So I don't mean any of this to be like all women are this way and all men are that way. But it is a story I've heard from a lot of female mathematicians that they had to either learn how to speak differently or assert themselves a little bit more to be taken seriously in the world of math. And we need to change that. I mean, a woman should be able to be who she is and communicate however she wants to communicate and be respected for the work that she does and the power of her thought, and not just for, being able to be aggressive in how she presents herself.
Right. Yes. Hallelujah. As one of the less aggressive ones myself, I would be all for that. And also as a mathematician who's kind of always been a slowpoke, I would like to underscore your point that, I think people know this, that intelligence is very multidimensional. Speed is one thing, but there's a lot of other ways to be smart and good at math. Quickness Absolutely. Is not the only game in town.
No. And sometimes in the schools, I think we inadvertently focus a little bit on speed, especially when there's a heavy emphasis on testing and you only have a certain amount of time for the test. And it certainly doesn't reward a deep thinker.
Mm-hmm. And the same thing, because of the testing culture, understandably, teachers want to test individual students. So collaboration is not only discouraged, but impossible on a typical test. But in real life, in math, collaboration, as you suggested, is the way that it does tend to operate. Most math papers nowadays are written by mathematicians working together. But so having talked a little about contemporary issues, why don't we move now into the future? And as you start looking forward to the next 10 years, congratulations on these 10 years. How have you seen the museum evolve over these past 10 years under your leadership for a lot of that time?
Well, it's interesting. When we first started the museum, there were a lot of naysayers. A lot of people thought math is not universally loved, and that's true. Mm-hmm. So this is not a very good business plan to build a museum for something that people don't like. And that's part of the reason why we needed the museum, frankly, was to help people see math in a different way and develop a better relationship with it. So when we first started out, we were very strictly a museum and we had exhibits and that was the focus. But we very quickly, we had the Math Encounters program from even before we opened the museum. And we very quickly realized that the human interaction is critical, even in the museum, even with the exhibits. We have a wonderful staff who will come and tell us time and again that it was through someone they met in the museum, talking to them about math, sharing their joy of math, that they really became more inspired and had a good time. And so we started focusing more on programs. And I think since I've been in charge and been the director of the museum, we've had a lot of very diverse programs. And anytime I see something that's even halfway of interest, if there's any connection to mathematics, I will try and find a way to exploit that, because the more connections and touch points we can find, the more people we can bring in. So some people like games, we'll have a game night. Some people like astronomy. We had someone come in and talk about what was going on in the night sky. Some people like nature and the world around them. We had someone come in and talk about the math of bird flight. We've had all kinds of programs in different areas. And I think we've become now at this point probably as well known, or maybe even more well known for the programming we do than for the physical space and the exhibits, even though those are equally compelling. Certainly, we have a broader geographic reach with our online programs than we could ever hope to have with one physical space in one particular city.
Well, it's a dynamite combination, the exhibits and the programming together. And as you say, the human connection that becomes possible through both, but especially the programming too. Well, so what about the future? I mean, how is the museum hoping to grow and evolve in the years ahead?
So the museum is actually hoping to grow both in programming ways and also physically. So maybe I'll start with the physical. Because we were trying to get started quickly and sort of as a proof of concept for people who thought maybe a math museum couldn't be successful, we rented space, and it's not a large space, and we're paying commercial rent, but we wanted to get up and running quickly. And the space has been wonderful for us, but there are ways in which we need to be bigger. For example, we do not have a dedicated space for early learners. And when we do have all those field trips coming in and the museum is filled with hundreds of children, let's say, kindergarten through 12th grade, it's not necessarily a great place for really little ones, for your 2-year-olds and your 3-year-olds to have a place where they can start to explore math and develop positive experiences related to math, which, by the way, does happen as early as 18 months in our experience. So having a space that's dedicated for little ones would be wonderful. During the busy times of the year, when we're not in a pandemic, we actually turn schools away. We only have 3 classrooms, and that's not enough capacity for the demand. So we'd like to be bigger to be able to accommodate more school groups. We don't have a real auditorium. We put out chairs on a floor and bring a screen down, and it works, but the people in the back can't see as well as the people in the front. So building a full auditorium would be great. And the last thing we're really lacking is food service. And so people come in and are having such a great time, and then they want to know, can we just grab a bite for lunch and keep it interacting, keep playing? And the answer is no, you have to leave and come back. So there are a lot of reasons why we'd like to expand physically. And then in terms of other initiatives, we do have an initiative to improve diversity in the world of mathematics. And so we have a lot of potential programs we're thinking about in that realm, and a lot of initiatives that we're ready to launch if we can raise the money to. And that's a very big focus for us right now, is helping move the needle on getting more diverse candidates interested in math from the early stages, but also at the college age, majoring in math, going on to graduate school. And we really want to find a way to move the needle on that, not just do a single program, which we've done and which is successful, but how do we replicate that? How do we make that scalable? And so one important idea we have, in fact, collaborating with someone I know you know well, Alan Alda, his Center for Communicating Science, is to bring in early career mathematicians of diverse backgrounds who don't know much about public outreach and train them to do math outreach, and then send them back to the communities where they live to share one talk about mathematics that they've worked on and shopped with the museum. And if we do that every year and we keep sending more and more people back out to their communities, these are people who will serve as role models. So we're very excited about the idea of something that's scalable in that way. And we're also talking more about what the digital world could look like for us. So we do have a lot of online programming now, but the digital world is much more than just a Zoom program. And we did take one little toe in the water on that. We were supposed to have a sculpture exhibit open in April of 2020. And of course, as everyone knows, the world changed in March of 2020 and the museum shut down. And so we could not have that sculpture show. But the sculptor, the artist, happens to be a very talented technologist. And he said, I think I could build a virtual version of your physical gallery and place my sculptures in it. And that's exactly what we did. And we discovered that that actually had a lot of benefits. This particular artist, one of the things about his sculpture is that they look different no matter depending which side you look at the sculpture from. And we discovered in the virtual version of the gallery, you could get a perspective that you would never get in the real world, which is you could fly over the top of the sculpture and look at it top down. And sometimes those views were very interesting and very surprising. Also, of course, the fact that so many people from around the world could visit the gallery without being in New York City. So that's one example of sort of a digital experience that's not an event that we're running in Zoom, but was something much more interesting and immersive. And we would love to explore that further in the future and see what other ways we can connect with people around the world.
Well, you've given us a lot to think about here. But for anyone who is curious to learn more about the museum, where could they go to learn about the activities, the exhibits, the future? So
our website is momath.org. That's momath.org. And if you want to read about the events, it's events.momath.org, and you can always see what's coming up. I will just close with one quick story about the name, MoMath. When we were trying to think about the name of this museum we were going to open, we took some professional advice. And the professional advice came in two pieces. And one piece was based on studies of science museums. And actually the advice was, don't use the word science if you're opening a science museum. That's not cool. That's not engaging. And if science is not good, although there haven't been many studies in this country, if science is not a good word to use, math has to be worse.
Right.
So don't use the word math and don't use the word museum, because people have a sense that museums are stodgy places where you look at things behind glass. And so the only expert advice we got was not to use the word math and not to use the word museum. And so we had all kinds of ideas. We were going to be the math factory or the Imaginarium, all kinds of ideas that went along with that advice. And nothing was really resonating with us except for one name, which turned out to be taken by someone else. So we were still kind of spinning our wheels. And finally, one day we had a conversation with a small group of organizers. And we said, why are we hiding from the word math and the word museum? Isn't the whole purpose of this organization to make so that the word math is not something you would run away from? And so why don't we just celebrate exactly who we are? And instead of trying to sugarcoat it in some way, just come right out and say, we are the Museum of Math, and be proud of that. And so that's how we ended up being MoMath, Museum of Math.
Well, thank you so much, Cindy, for explaining all this to us. And best of luck with the future. It's a great first 10 years, and here's to many more.